This lesson is to serve as an introduction to polynomials. So something we're going to be looking at over the next couple weeks. So first thing, what is a polynomial? So it's an algebraic expression that is the sum or difference of terms. So first of all, an algebraic expression just means that we're not dealing with any equal signs right now. And when we see it's the sum or difference, so adding or subtracting of terms, it just means that there's different parts to the problems. Each term contains only variables with positive integer exponents. So the exponents or the powers can only be positive integers. So we're not going to have any negative exponents. Okay, no negative exponents, no fractions, no variables, so we can't have letters as the exponents. Okay, they can only be positive integers that we see above our variables. So if you look at the example down here at the bottom of the page, we have a polynomial. When we look at this, it's made up of 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4, all separated by adding or subtracting. Then to really tell if it's a polynomial or not, when we look at those exponents, this one here, there's an invisible 1, okay, even though we don't see it. Attached to all those variables, they're all positive integers. There's no variables up there, there's no other x's, there's no fractions, there's no negative numbers, there's no decimals or square roots or anything weird up there. Something on the other hand over here, we have a non-example. So something that looks like a polynomial but isn't. When we examine it carefully, we have all these x's, but those x's are up in the exponent. That's a type of exponential expression. It's not a polynomial, so it would behave differently than what we're talking about. A lot of times, polynomials are named or classified, that might be the other way that they say this, by how many terms it has. Some of this may look familiar to you, or some of these vocabulary words. So the first one is a monomial. A monomial is a polynomial that only has one term. So an example of that would be 4x squared. Okay, so even though there's a couple parts, there's a 4 and an x and a squared there, it's all smushed together as one single term. There's no adding or subtracting in that problem. The next type would be a binomial, which is a polynomial that consists of 2 monomial terms, or 2 terms. So an example of a binomial would be something like 4x squared minus 25. So I can see that there's 2 different parts separated by that subtraction sign there. And the third one, a trinomial, is a polynomial consisting of 3 monomial terms. So an example of that, I'm going to kind of stick with some of the same, 4x squared plus 10x minus 25. So now we have 3 separate parts to that polynomial separated by adding and subtracting. So we have the 4x squared, the 10x, and the negative 25 are all separate terms. Once you get past 3 terms, they start to not classify them so much by name, and a lot of times they'll just call them polynomial. Okay, it just starts to get kind of confusing when you have these long strings of numbers. But these 3 terms, monomial, binomial, trinomial, they use a lot, so you need to be familiar with those. There are different parts of a polynomial that sometimes we need to look at. The first one is called the degree. Okay, so the degree is the highest exponent, which we'll go into a little bit more on the next page. This term at the end, the one that doesn't have a variable, in this case it's the 1, that's what we call the constant term. It doesn't change. And then the other part here to be familiar with as far as vocabulary goes is this 3, the one that's out in front of the first term. This is called the leading coefficient. Okay, so coefficient you guys have seen before, it's the number attached to a variable. So in this case, the leading coefficient's kind of like the line leader from elementary school. When your polynomial is written so that the highest power, or the degree, is first, the leading coefficient will be the first number out in front of the polynomial. So this here is exactly what we just went through. So if you want to even screenshot this, that might be a good idea. So that way you have this vocabulary somewhere handy, or you can always come back to it in this video. So leading coefficient, again, is the coefficient or number in front of the first term of the polynomial when in standard form. Okay, and we'll talk what standard form means here in a second. The constant term is a number only, so it's the term that has no variable in that term, so it's only a number, no letter. And the degree is the highest power of a term in the polynomial. Highest power, in this case for us in Algebra 1, we're talking about the highest exponent. In later courses, sometimes there's something else you have to do if you have x's and y's in the same terms, but right now we're keeping the simple. The last thing that we want to talk about here is what standard form means. So a lot of times this is going to come up in problems, and it's something that you're going to kind of get used to doing anyway. Standard form is when a polynomial is written so that the exponents on the variables decrease, meaning it starts with the highest exponent and then each term the exponent would descend or decrease. So if we look at this one here, the example, we have this polynomial, 7 plus 2x to the 4th power minus 4x squared. And right now it's kind of just written in any order. We want to write it in standard form. So in order to do that, we have to start with the term with the highest exponent. So this one only has 3 terms. This is a trinomial. So it's nothing too crazy that we're going to have to look at a bunch of terms for. So when I look at my 3 different terms, my 7, my 2x to the 4th power, and my negative 4x squared, well, I can find my highest exponent pretty easily, and it's this term here. So that's going to be the first part of it. So 2x to the 4th power is going to be the first term that I rewrite. Then I go to my next highest power. So when I'm looking at this, I have a 7 that has no variable attached. It's a constant. And then I have this negative 4x to the 2nd power. Well, this actually has an x, so I know that one would have to go next. And a 2nd power comes before no x. So I keep my sign with me, minus 4x to the 2nd power. And then the last thing, I have the 7. I just have to use my brain a little bit here. I see that this is a positive since there's no negative sign there. So in order to attach it, I'm going to bring down a plus 7. So now my polynomial is written in standard form. It goes from the highest exponent down to the lowest. So my exponents are written in descending order. I hope that this was helpful. Remember, you can always go back and rewatch any part of this video if you need a little bit of extra help or refreshing on just a lot of this vocabulary for polynomials.